He dropped the cake knife, right there, next to the 3-tier engagement cake in front of 50 guests. The sound of it hitting the floor, I'll never forget it. All I had done was walk in wearing my mother's vintage gown and read her final will, naming me the sole heir. Hi, I'm Rachel. And just last week, my sister kicked me out of her engagement party for looking too cheap. What she didn't know? Our mom had left me something that would change everything. You're going to want to hear what happened next. Before we jump into the story, if you don't mind, let me know where you're from by leaving a comment below. That way, I can send a special hello your way. Now go ahead, grab yourself a warm cup of water and find a comfy spot. It's time to begin the story. My sister hadn't texted me in over a year, so when her name lit up my phone screen with a message that read, "You're invited," my first instinct was to check if it was a scam. Victoria Langley. That name always landed like a thud in my chest, not because I missed her, far from it, but because I never quite knew what version of her I was about to face. This version had apparently remembered my existence long enough to add me to the guest list for her engagement party. The text was bare. No hey or hope you're well, just a generic invitation link followed by would love to see you there. Right. She once told me, at our great-uncle's funeral no less, that the dress I wore looked like it came from a garage sale. I remember standing there with a plastic cup of lukewarm cider in my hand, her eyes scanning me like she was measuring my worth by thread count. It wasn't what she said that hurt the most. It was the effortless cruelty in her tone, the way she knew it would land and didn't care. Since then, we'd coasted along a careful avoidance. I stayed quiet. She stayed golden. I sat on my tiny front porch, letting the soft savanna air wrap around me like a damp shawl. The azaleas had exploded into pink and white clouds along the sidewalk, and the scent of wisteria drifted from the neighbor's trellis. Spring had a way of making things look gentler than they felt. Across from me, perched on the old railing, sat a sealed envelope. Cream-colored, slightly curled at the edges. My mother's handwriting scrawled across the front. For Rachel, to be opened when you're ready. It had been there for nearly a year, untouched, just like our last conversation. I stared at the invitation again. Engagement party, Langley family home, Saturday at 5. Cocktail attire. Before I could delete the message, my phone buzzed again. It was from my father. "Would be nice if you made the effort," he wrote. No greeting, no punctuation, just that. As if I were a plant they forgot to water and suddenly remembered. I didn't respond. Instead, I tucked my phone into the pocket of my hoodie and walked to the corner thrift shop. It wasn't about the dress, not really, but I figured if I was going to show up, I might as well do it on my own terms. That's the thing about being overlooked long enough. You get very good at choosing for yourself. Inside the shop, I ran my fingers along racks of fabric that smelled faintly of cedar and old perfume. A navy wrap dress caught my eye, simple, no brand, a little worn at the hem. The kind of thing my mom would have said has good bones. I tried it on in the cracked mirror in the corner, smoothing the fabric over my hips, tugging the collar into place. It wasn't stunning, but it was me. Quiet, practical, and just enough. As I paid, I remembered a night years ago when Mom stayed up past midnight, helping me sew lace onto a secondhand prom dress. Victoria had worn a designer gown that year, of course, with a tiara and matching shoes. But I still remember how proud Mom looked when I walked down the stairs. "You look like you belong to yourself," she'd said. I hadn't understood it then. I do now. Back home, I hung the dress over my bedroom door and sat cross-legged on the floor. The sealed envelope was still on the porch railing, waiting like it always had. I didn't touch it, but I looked at it a little longer. I opened my laptop and clicked the RSVP link. It felt like pressing a bruise. There was a box for dietary restrictions. I left it blank. No one would ask. After submitting the form, I closed my laptop and sat still. I didn't text anyone. Didn't call Joanna. Didn't even tell Aunt Diane, though I knew she'd find out soon enough. I didn't need support or advice. Not this time. Maybe I just needed to see for myself what kind of place I'd been shut out of all these years. Maybe I wanted to confirm that nothing had changed. Or maybe, just maybe, I was tired of pretending I didn't care. It was only a party, I told myself. But deep down, I knew it was the beginning of something I couldn't name. I showed up 30 minutes early. They acted like I'd walked in uninvited. The Langley house on Gaston Street was dressed to impress. White columns trimmed in soft ivy, lights strung like constellations between magnolia trees, and a quartet near the fountain playing Coldplay as if it were Mozart. The gravel crunched under my heels as I stepped through the iron gate, my thrifted navy wrap dress fluttering at the hem. I'd even curled my hair. No one was at the door. A waiter in a starched white jacket raised his eyebrows when I hesitated. "Engagement party?" I asked. "Of course," he said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "This way." He led me to the garden where small groups of people were already sipping champagne and nibbling at tiny things perched on crackers. I recognized a few faces, old neighbors, my dad's business friends, a couple of Victoria's sorority sisters whose names I'd forgotten, but whose smirks I hadn't. They glanced over, squinting as if they couldn't quite place me, or worse, had and chose to pretend otherwise. Aunt Diane noticed me first. She gave a quick little wave and motioned to an open seat at a table beneath a lantern-draped oak. I made my way over, careful to avoid dragging the heels of my nude pumps through the soft grass. Diane stood to greet me with a quiet hug. "Glad you came," she whispered. I gave her a grateful smile and sat, folding my hands in my lap. Victoria emerged from the house a few minutes later, glowing like a lifestyle ad, ivory silk dress, statement earrings, and a smile that could cut glass. She paused at the top of the stone steps, allowing the moment to settle before descending, Caleb on her arm. He looked as polished as ever in a tailored suit, but his eyes darted nervously toward the crowd. They made their rounds slowly, basking in admiration. When Victoria finally caught sight of me, her lips twitched. Not quite a smile. "Rachel," she said as she approached, "I wasn't sure you'd come." "You invited me," I replied simply, trying not to flinch as her gaze swept over me. "Yes, well," she said, "I suppose I did." She turned before I could say anything else. Caleb gave me a small nod. Polite. Distant. Like I was someone he'd once passed in a waiting room. I sat through the small talk, the clinking glasses, the polite questions about what I'd been up to, though no one really listened to the answers. Dad arrived late, kissed Victoria on the cheek, gave me a curt nod, and joined a group near the cocktail table. When the string quartet fell silent, Victoria stood at the center of the patio and raised her glass. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice practiced, clear. "It means the world to Caleb and me to share this moment with the people who matter most." There were murmurs of agreement, a few camera phones raised. I took a small sip of sparkling wine and focused on a floating candle in the bird bath beside me. "We're so grateful," she continued, "to be surrounded by family who've supported us, celebrated us, and," she paused, "understand the importance of showing up dressed like they belong." Laughter rippled through the crowd. I didn't look around. I didn't need to. Caleb shifted slightly, his hand tightening on the stem of his glass. Dad let out a low chuckle. My ears burned. The candle flame blurred behind a rush of heat in my eyes. Victoria's toast ended with the expected cheer, and the music resumed. I stood, planning to slip away quietly, but she intercepted me near the hedge-lined path leading back to the gate. "You know this isn't your kind of crowd," she said, her voice low, silky. "You sent the invitation." "I was being generous," she replied. "But you're lowering the tone. This isn't your space." I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came. Before I could move, a man in a black vest approached with quiet efficiency. "Miss Langley?" he asked. Victoria nodded once, barely glancing at me. "She's ready to go." The man gestured politely toward the side gate. I walked, each step measured, my heels clicking against the stone path. I didn't rush. I didn't look back. The Spanish moss swayed above me, lanterns glowing warm against the dusk. A light breeze picked up the edge of my dress as I passed through the gate and stepped onto the sidewalk. The chatter faded behind me. I waited until I'd turned the corner before I slipped off my shoes and held them in one hand. My feet ached, but I welcomed the feeling. It reminded me I was still here, still real, still mine. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope. It was time. I'd kept her letter sealed for almost a year. That night, I broke the seal with trembling hands. It had sat quietly on my shelf, tucked beneath a wooden box of old family photos and pressed flowers. The envelope was cream-colored, slightly wrinkled at the edges, but still firm. Her handwriting, elegant and a little slanted, read simply, "For Rachel. When you're ready." Ready wasn't the word I'd use, but I was something. I'd walked home barefoot, my heels dangling from one hand, her voice echoing in my ears. Victoria's, not Mom's, lowering the tone, "Not your space." I turned on the lamp in my living room. It cast a warm halo across the hardwood floor. The fan in the corner hummed like a breath. My kitchen still held the faint scent of lavender and lemon oil. Mom used to clean with it, said it made everything feel softer, even the hard days. I sat on the edge of the couch and held the envelope between my fingers. Then I opened it. There were two things inside: a folded piece of lined paper and a smaller legal document stapled at the corner. The note was written in blue ink, her cursive firm and graceful. "If you're reading this, it means they've erased me. But not you. You never let go of people even when they've let go of you. That's your greatest strength and your heaviest burden. I left this for you because you always saw me, even when the rest of them only saw what they wanted. The house is yours now, the lake cabin too, my jewelry, what's left of it, and anything else they didn't already borrow. I made sure it was legal. I made sure it was fair. I trust you'll know what to do with it. Love always. Mom." I didn't cry. Not yet. I unfolded the second paper. It was a copy of her will, dated, notarized, and stamped. The name at the top was clear: Margaret Ellen Langley. The named heir, me, only me. I read it 3 times slowly, as if the letters might change on me. Then I pulled out my phone and called Joanna. She picked up on the second ring. "Rachel, hey, I just opened it." A pause. "And?" She left everything to me, all of it. Her house, the lake property, the jewelry. "It's here in writing." Joanna didn't sound surprised. "That lines up with what she told me before. She made me promise not to mention it until you came to me." I pressed my fingers to my temple. "It's real?" "Absolutely. It was filed through my firm, witnessed, notarized, sealed, ironclad." My throat tightened. She knew they'd ignore it. Ignore her. Joanna's voice softened. "She knew they'd make you feel like an outsider. She wanted you to have something that couldn't be taken from you, something louder than silence." There was that word again. After we hung up, I stared at the paper in my lap, then reached for the wooden box above the shelf. It held old snapshots: me in pigtails, Victoria in ballet slippers, Mom at the stove with a wooden spoon in hand, smiling like she could taste the future. I pulled out one of the photos and held it in the light. We were sitting at the kitchen table, my head resting on her shoulder. She was brushing my hair. The memory returned like a song I hadn't heard in years. "It won't always feel like this," she had murmured that night. "Someday you'll understand why I didn't fight every battle out loud." I hadn't understood. Not then. I stood and walked to the kitchen, the cool tile grounding me. My hands shook slightly as I poured a glass of water. Then I glanced at the small trash bin beside the sink. For a moment, I considered it, throwing the whole envelope away, pretending it never arrived, starting over. But something inside me shifted. Not a crack, not a break, more like a settling. I folded the papers back neatly and slid them into a manila folder. Then I pulled out a legal pad and a pen. The ink moved across the page almost without me thinking. Joanna, rehearsal dinner date, guest list, legal terms to review. For once, I didn't second-guess the plan forming in my mind. I didn't ask whether it was dramatic or petty or too much. I just let it exist. When I texted Joanna later that night and asked, "Would you stand beside me if I decide to read it?" she replied within seconds, "Absolutely. Name the time." I closed the curtains, turned off the lights, and sat in the dark for a moment, and I knew exactly where the dress was and what I had to do. The box was under her old cedar chest, wrapped in yellowing paper and tied with twine. Saturday morning started quietly. No text messages, no weather alerts, just Aunt Diane's car pulling up outside my apartment at 8 a.m. She didn't honk or knock, just waited. I got in without a word. She handed me a to-go cup of coffee, already sweetened just the way I liked. "Steven's out golfing," she said as we pulled away. "We got a window." The drive to my childhood home was short but heavy. I hadn't been inside since Mom's funeral. Even then, I didn't go upstairs. Diane unlocked the front door and let me walk in first. The air inside smelled like dust and something faintly floral. Rose water. I closed my eyes for a second, letting it settle. Mom's bedroom was at the end of the hall, across from the linen closet I used to hide in during games of sardines. The door creaked the same way it always had. Inside, nothing had changed. Lace curtains drifted in the open window. The wallpaper was still pale blue with faded roses. Her hairbrush lay on the vanity, a strand of silver still tangled in the bristles. The room didn't feel abandoned. It felt paused. I stood there for a minute, absorbing it all. Diane nudged me gently. "Check under the chest." The cedar chest sat at the foot of her bed. I crouched and reached beneath, fingers brushing against something soft and dry. I pulled it out slowly, a large, flat box wrapped in old paper, tied tightly with twine. A faint scent of cedar and powder wafted up. I sat on the carpet and untied the knot with steady hands. Inside, nestled in layers of tissue, was the gown. Ivory silk, soft as breath. A high neckline embroidered with tiny white beads and threadwork that shimmered when the light caught it. Mother-of-pearl buttons trailed down the back. I lifted it carefully, the fabric sighing as it unfolded. I held it against myself and walked to the full-length mirror. The dress fit better than I expected, as if it had waited for me to grow into it, not just in size, but in presence. There had been a night when I was 17. I'd come home from a fight with Victoria, another remark about my shoes or my GPA, or the fact that I was always too sensitive. Mom had pulled me into her room, opened that same cedar chest, and held up the dress. "This will be yours someday," she'd whispered, "and when you wear it, you'll know you're not walking alone." Back then, it felt like a fairy tale. Now, it felt like armor. I hung the gown on the back of my bedroom door when I got home. The late spring light slanted through the blinds and lit up the fabric like stained glass. I didn't touch it again, just stared at it, quietly. Later that afternoon, I met Joanna at a coffee shop near her office. She wore a linen blazer and no makeup, as usual, her hair tied back in a no-nonsense bun. She slid a folder across the table. Certified copy, filed, time-stamped, watermarked. You'll have the original in your bag, but this version will be easier to present in public. I nodded, my fingers brushing the edge of the folder. "You still want to do this at the rehearsal dinner?" she asked. "I do." Joanna studied me for a long moment. "You're not doing this to embarrass them, are you?" "No," I said. "I'm doing it to end the story they've been telling about me for years." She nodded slowly. "Then let's make sure it's the truth that's loudest in the room." That evening, I tidied my apartment, even though no one was coming over. I watered my plants, lit a lavender candle, and made myself a bowl of rice with soy-glazed tofu. Everything felt sharper somehow. The sound of the spoon against the bowl, the cool tile under my feet, the hum of the refrigerator, like the world was quietly bracing for impact. I stood in the doorway to my room just before bed, looking at the dress. It hung there like a memory come to life. "You saved this for me," I said aloud. "I'm ready." I didn't need revenge. I needed the truth to have a room full of witnesses. The music stopped before I even reached the table. It was a gentle hush at first, the kind that spread slowly across a room without force, like a fog slipping under the door. One by one, heads turned. A waiter carrying a silver tray of champagne paused mid-step. The string trio at the front of the dining room lowered their bows. I could hear the soft tick of silverware being set down. And then, nothing. I walked in through the side entrance just as Joanna had planned. The Georgian room looked exactly as I expected, impeccable and fragile. Everything was white and gold, from the folded napkins to the plates rimmed in 24-karat trim. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, artificial glow across the guests, all dressed in their finest. A 3-tier cake stood on a pedestal at the far end of the room, crowned with blush-colored peonies. Victoria stood mid-toast, one hand raised, the other resting lightly on Caleb's arm. She wore a blush satin gown with a neckline that plunged deeper than necessary. Her earrings sparkled. Her expression did not. She turned slowly as I approached, her voice catching just slightly. "Is that Mom's?" Her words weren't loud, but they echoed. I didn't answer. I simply walked forward, heels clicking on polished wood, the silk of Mom's gown whispering with every step. I felt the weight of the folder in my hand like a second spine. Aunt Diane met my gaze across the room. She didn't smile. She didn't blink. She just gave a single nod. I reached the long, polished table and gently set the folder down in the center, between the tall centerpiece of ivory roses and the place card marked, "Father of the Bride." "This," I said clearly, "is Margaret Langley's final will and testament." For a moment, it was as if the air left the room. Joanna stepped forward from the side wall where she'd been waiting, calm, composed in a navy sheath dress, a subtle pin of her firm's logo on her lapel. "I'm her attorney," she said evenly, placing her hand on the folder. "This document is legal, certified, and properly filed. It names Rachel Langley as the sole beneficiary of Margaret Langley's estate." No one moved. Victoria's mouth opened, then closed. Stephen stared at the folder as though it were a grenade. Caleb shifted in his chair, glancing around the room like he'd suddenly realized there were no exits. Joanna continued, her voice steady. "The estate includes the family home, the lake property, all remaining jewelry and assets, as well as any holdings not previously allocated." Victoria found her voice. "This is insane," she said, laughing too loudly. She never would have." "She did," I said. My voice didn't rise. "And she did it because she knew what would happen if she didn't. She knew how you'd try to erase her, how you already were." "That's not true," Stephen murmured, finally speaking. I looked at him. "When's the last time you even said her name?" He didn't answer. "She left this for me," I said, "because I didn't turn away from her when she was sick, because I showed up, because I didn't ask what she could still give." The silence deepened, thick and heavy. Caleb reached toward the cake, maybe for balance, maybe just to do something. His hand brushed the handle of the silver cake knife, ornate, etched, heirloom, and it tumbled from its perch. It hit the floor with a sharp clang. No one moved to pick it up. The moment didn't explode. It folded in on itself. Eyes drifted away from me, not because I was invisible, but because they couldn't look at me and still pretend nothing had changed. I turned to Victoria. "You erased her," I said softly. "She remembered me." She opened her mouth again, but nothing came out. Her eyes were glassy. Her hand clenched the back of her chair, knuckles white. Behind me, Joanna gently closed the folder and slid it into her bag. I looked around the room once more, at familiar faces that had once laughed at my thrift store clothes, that had accepted my absence with ease, that had believed the version of me Victoria curated. Some of them looked ashamed. A few looked confused. Most looked uncomfortable. And not a single person spoke. I didn't need to say more. I had no interest in watching them scramble for explanations or second chances. This wasn't about punishment, it was about truth. And truth didn't need an audience to be real, but sometimes it needed one to matter. I turned and walked away, not to punish them, but because I had already won. They didn't call the next day. They called every day after that. At first, it was Stephen's number. 1 missed call, then 2, then a voicemail I didn't bother to check until 3 days later. "You've made your point," his voice said stiffly. "I hope you're happy." Then came flowers, white lilies delivered without a note. Then a second arrangement, pink roses this time, "From your family," scrawled on the card like an afterthought. I left both on the hallway table in my building. Someone else could enjoy them. Aunt Diane texted a simple, "Proud of you." Nothing more, nothing less. I saved that one. Victoria, on the other hand, sent only one message. "I hope you know you've ruined everything." I didn't reply. Some messages don't deserve the courtesy of silence. They deserve to vanish. The following week, Joanna and I met at a small cafe near Chippewa Square. She slid the final packet of documents across the table. "Congratulations," she said with a dry smile. "You're officially the legal owner of all Margaret Langley assets and properties." I ran my finger over the raised notary seal. "Feels strange," I admitted, "like I won something I didn't enter." Joanna tilted her head. "You didn't win. You were chosen." I nodded slowly. We ordered tea and sat in quiet comfort, watching the Spanish moss sway through the window. I didn't need to fill the space between us with words. Some truths, once said aloud, don't need repeating. Later that afternoon, I walked to the river. Savannah's Riverwalk was busy, as always. Tourists with cameras, couples holding hands, joggers with earbuds in. I walked at a slower pace, breathing in the warm, humid air and the scent of fried oysters wafting from the restaurants. A child pointed at a ferry chugging by, and for a moment I thought about what it meant to be visible, to be seen, not because of what you wore or how loudly you spoke, but because someone made space for you. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by manila envelopes, receipts, and old photos. I pulled out a clean sheet of paper and wrote a letter to the community college where I'd once taken night classes. A donation. Enough to start a small scholarship for first-generation college students. Girls like I used to be. Girls with good bones and bad odds. I named it after Mom. I didn't tell anyone. A few days later, I drove alone to the cemetery on the edge of town. Her grave wasn't grand. Just a simple stone, low to the ground, flanked by peonies that someone, probably Diane, had been tending. I crouched beside her and ran my hand over the name. Margaret Ellen Langley, 1954 to 2023. Loved, but not always heard. "I found what you left me," I whispered. "It was never the money." A breeze lifted my hair, just slightly. The sun peeked through the trees. A mockingbird landed on the fence and chirped once, then flew away. Back home, the mailbox creaked as I opened it. Inside was a final letter from Joanna's office confirming the closing of the estate. I took it inside and slid it into the bottom drawer of my desk, beneath the old photos and the note Mom had written in blue ink. Closure isn't loud. It doesn't come with applause or thank you speeches. Sometimes it's just a quiet kitchen, a window open to the breeze, and knowing you're not waiting for anyone's permission anymore. I made toast. I poured coffee. I didn't check my phone. And I walked home under Spanish moss and morning bird song. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a guest in my own life. There was no applause, no grand reconciliation, just a quiet peace I hadn't felt in years. In the stillness, I realized my mother hadn't just left me a house or a dress. She'd left me the courage to choose myself. Sometimes the loudest thing we can do is simply stand firm in the truth. Family isn't defined by who shares your name, but by who sees your worth when no one else does. And in this life, what we carry forward matters more than what we were denied. If this story spoke to your heart, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Feel free to share your reflections or memories. Sometimes our stories help others feel less alone.